Welcome. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. If you have to leave the session for any reason, the video will be available after. We have videos of all of the other previous sessions. They're a great resource for different topics. And of course, you can sign up for future sessions too, because we've got sessions through the fall every month. And I've lost Richard's bio somewhere on my computer, but I will find it. My name's Darby Love. I'm from Vancouver Island Regional Library, and Richard Bernier is our presenter as well as our Master Gardener Wrangler for like the third or fourth year in a row. His gardening hobby started when he was a preteen, when one of his elderly neighbors hired him for his first job to help them in their garden. They showed him what plants were weeds and directed him to a veggie garden that was in dire need of weeding. He gardened on and off until his teens when he discovered indoor plants, some of whom you've met, and he started his journey in husbandry. The gardening bug had bitten him. After moving to the coast in 1994, he became enamored with the climate, and developed a taste for exotic plants, both indoor and outdoor. Does that cover it, Richard?
Yeah, pretty well covers it.
And we also have Joe Canning with are those daffodils?
Those are double um, narcissus.
Yes.
They're poeticus. So they're one of the very highly scented um, species
And
daffodils.
Joe is here to help with the chat and managing the Q&A at the end of the presentation, as well as being the idea person from which this whole thing sprang and has taken on a life of its own. Deborah Garad, she is also going to help with the chat and the Q&A. She has great sessions on pruning that were very popular. So we are going to keep the chat for things that are like, what did she say? Or you can share your own experience, that kind of thing. And then we're going to keep the Q&A for the questions for Richard at the end. So he'll deliver his presentation and then all of the questions will get answered until we run out of time. Sound good? Excellent. Over to you, Richard.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Well, we're talking about raised beds tonight. That's raised garden beds. So let's just do this. Presented by myself, Certified Master Gardener of Vancouver Island Master Gardeners Association in partnership with Vancouver Island Regional Library. Raised Garden Beds 2025, Vancouver Island Master Gardener Association, Vancouver Island Regional Library. This seminar is property of the Vancouver Island Regional Library and Vancouver Island Master Gardeners Association. It is for educational purposes only. Commercial use of all or part of the seminar and its contents are prohibited without express let's just move this box. Without consent from Vancouver Island Master Gardeners Association and Vancouver Regional Library. The information for the seminar is science-based and is accurate to the best of VINGA's knowledge. Use of the information in the seminar is the sole discretion, responsibility, and liability of the user. Vancouver Island VINCA is a chapter of Master Gardener Association of British Columbia, a member of the International Service Organization of specifically trained volunteer teachers dedicated to stewardship and environment. Master Gardeners work in partnership with the public sector agencies, garden clubs, nonprofit service organizations, private enterprise to teach, promote science-based, sustainable horticultural knowledge and methods. Some of the images and information are from internet sources. These are labeled or cited, and we thank the persons and company for the use of this nonprofit educational seminar. So what is a garden bed? Now, a garden bed is anything that's raised out of the ground. It can be a container garden. It could be a raised bed, it could be heap soil. It's there to improve areas above the ground where plants can grow. The reason for them would be, oh, hugelkultur, which is also kind of an raised bed. It's a German word that means mound culture or hill culture. Hugelkultur is a sloped, raised planting bed filled with topsoil, wood, organic material. German and European people have been practicing it for gardening method for hundreds of years. Now, I've just mentioned it. I won't be mentioning much more about it. I think that will be actually for another seminar. So some stock images. Garden bed, raised beds. You can see there's your veggies and everything else. And this, whoops, sorry. And this is kind of a slide showing what hugelkultur is all about. Why use a raised bed? Native soil is unsuitable for ground planting of a garden, hard pan, clay, or rocks. Here in the island, we have areas of hard pan. We also have areas of clay, and if you live out in the news, you're gardening on a rock. So the only other way to do it is in a raised bed. Another reason, the area is too wet. If you have a wet area in your yard or your yard is lower than everybody else's, well, then chances are your garden is going to be wet in the wintertime and take longer to dry out. Complete control of growing conditions, moisture, fertilizer, soil type, and mulch. So in other words, you're actually creating a garden, basically in a raised box. And you have all these things that you can you have complete control of it. The soil warms up quicker in the spring. In other words, you can extend your season. So you can start crops earlier in the spring and grow them later into the fall. Ease of gardening for gardeners that are experiencing mobility issues. And yes, we are all getting there. I have arthritis. So getting down on my hands and knees is not as easy. And getting up from my hands and knees is not as easy as it used to be when I was younger, when I actually started gardening for those neighbors of mine. Suitable for square foot gardening and crop rotation. In other words, you can put a grid on it, and there are various books. There's even a tool that will show you how to plant different plants in it. It's a square foot, and there's little holes in it. You can sow seeds with it, or you can put starts. You just actually put a pencil mark in the soil, and it'll kind of give you an idea of how much room a cabbage would need, how much room beans and all these other things would require. Aesthetic appeal. Rather than having these mounds of dirt in your yard, you can have raised garden beds, and they can look quite nice, quite aesthetically pleasing. Pest control. Yep, pest control. You can hopefully you can keep the rats and the rabbits out and various other little critters. Where would you place these raised beds? Well, got to be a place where it gets at least 6 hours of full sunlight during the day. Now, it doesn't have to be during the noon. It could be sun in the morning and sun in the evening, or it doesn't have to be continuous, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. In a raised bed, the longest axis should be east-west. And why is that? Well, you can plant the larger crop at the back of the bed and the shorter ones at the front, and then you won't get shading of the smaller plants. Proximity to garden structures, garden sheds, greenhouse, and compost. Well, I don't know if you've ever gardened, but having a garden shed about 300 feet away from where you're gardening is not very handy at all. Um, a greenhouse is always nice. If you have the room for it, you can actually store some vegetables in it in the wintertime if you wish. You can dry your garlic in it in the fall and compost. Yeah, compost heap next to your garden beds is a great idea. Just means that you don't have to haul it halfway around the yard just to place to put it. Microclimate. We all have microclimates in our gardens. They can be next to a wall, south-facing wall, could be next to a fence, anywhere where it'll cut down the wind, the prevailing wind, and reduce, actually increase the heat also. Yeah, proximity to water sources and utilities, which is kind of important. If you have to drag a hose halfway around the yard just to get to the raised beds, it can be a bit of a problem. Utilities, you might want power there. You might want, well, for all of you people that like listening to music, well, I do when I garden. It's always handy to have a plug there where you can plug in some music and just spend the day. Ease of access. Now, ease of access, you wouldn't want to put it at the bottom of a big hill. For one reason, you don't want to have to be bringing manure or compost all the way down the hill or up the hill. It's always nice to have it somewhere where it's readily accessible and also maybe close to the kitchen, where you can just run out and get some herbs if you want, or like some carrots for supper, or beans, or lettuce, or anything like that. Now, the dimensions of it. How big should these beds be? No more than 4 feet in width, or no more than 3 feet in width for children. 4 feet in width means that you can actually stand at the edge and reach halfway through into the bed from either side. If it's up against the fence, no more than 2.5 feet. That's about the right width that you can actually reach and cultivate the soil, plant, weed, whatever. 2.5 feet from the bed, if they're near a fence or a home. Ideal length is 4 to 10 feet. Now, the reason for that is if you have to go around the whole bed to get to something, it's much easier if it's 4 to 10 feet long. If you've got like a long 20-foot bed, well, getting from one side to the other means you have to do quite a walk around the garden. Maximum height, 12 to 8 inches is 18 inches is ideal. A foot is ideal for root vegetables. Now, I understand that if you're going to be using hugelkultur, or if you want these raised beds up higher, you can actually fill the bottom with rotted wood, compost, or anything like this, and then put the soil on top. That will actually aid the soil in retaining moisture. Square, rectangular, T, circle, oval, as long as you can reach all areas of the bed from the edge. And that's important. Allow 3 or 4 feet between the garden beds for room to maneuver a wheelbarrow or any other garden implements that you may have. It's difficult if you've only got 3 feet. 4 feet is probably a good measurement. Not only wheelbarrows, but anything that you have to move through the beds. Materials for the raised garden beds. Now, what do you make these beds out of? Wood is a popular choice. Metal's another choice that's coming more into the forefront now. Concrete blocks, poured concrete beds, felt bags, heaped soil, as in hugelkultur, dry stacked rocks. Hey, let's go through the pros and cons of wood. Pros, readily available here on the island. Not as cheap as it used to be, but still readily available. Uh, Relatively inexpensive, and it has good drainage and does insulate the soil to a certain degree. The cons, limited lifespan. So if you're hoping to have these raised beds for 20 years, chances are that might not happen. Maybe 10, maybe 12, 15 years at most. Require regular maintenance. The outside of the beds probably would. Uh, and there's the concern about using treated wood. Now, there is quite a few good articles on using treated wood for the beds. From what I've read, you have to be careful with what kind of treatment they have. Please, when you're buying the wood, uh, make sure that it can be in contact with plant roots. And I know that, Joe, can you remember who that lady was that was talking about the fact that the preservative doesn't really leach out into the soil?
Um, Actually, in terms of treating wood, it's a cuprinol, which is a copper-based toxin. And um, now in BC, the treatment it's no longer allowed. There are treatments, wood preservatives. They will all break down, and they are usually gone in about a year. And when I spoke with the alpine gardeners who make troughs out of the cement, of course, that will also leach. And they told me that all they do is that they let their troughs, the cement beds, um, sit out in our rain for the winter, and all the stuff is leached away. In terms of using treated wood, um, I asked, I think it was Dr. Chalker Scott, whether lining the bed with builder's plastic would help. And she said that yes, it does, in as much as until everything is leached, it protects the plants inside and the leaching moves away rather than into the soil of the bed.
Okay,
And
thank you.
that's all I know.
Okay, and these are some raised beds from a friend, Michael Fox, who's a master gardener. And you can see that's probably, it's got to be about 14 inches tall, filled with good soil. 21 inches, I've just been corrected. Metal beds. Okay, the pros, they're durable, low maintenance, modern look, and recyclable. Cons, expensive, heavy, heat retention, sharp edges, rust, and they don't work well for insulating the soil. Now, if you're going to be using raised beds, metal raised beds, you might want to make sure that they're powder coated or that they're galvanized. These will last longer than any other thing. Also, they're recyclable, very low maintenance. All you have to do is use a power washer to wash the outside of them. Myself, I wouldn't go to too dark of a color because they're going to have a tendency to heat up more in the summer. So if you stick to a lighter color, would be probably best. Um, my raised beds, I will be actually adding some foil insulation between the soil and the metal itself. Now, this is just to keep the roots cooler and extend the season a little bit. It's that bubble wrap with the foil backing on it. Now, most metal beds now don't have sharp edges anymore. The top of them are rolled over, and a lot of them actually you can get it's like a plastic V gasket that fits along the top surface of it. Now, these are my own raised beds that I'm actually putting together. They are 4 feet by probably about 6 feet, these here. And they're quite sturdy. And I will be filling them with wood at the bottom and then using soil on top of it. And this one will be for my cane fruit, my raspberries and tayberries and whatever else I put in. Concrete blocks. The pros, they're durable, readily available at a garden center or a home improvement center, inexpensive for the most part, and they offer a really stable base for the garden beds, although they do take up more room. Cons, they absorb heat significantly, so they do warm up quite a bit in the summer. With that, they do dry out faster also. And there is concerns about potential chemical leaching out of the blocks, especially if they're cinder blocks. As Jo said when I asked her, sometimes it's a good idea to sort of, if you're using cinder blocks, to let them age in the rain. Some of the other, the Allen blocks or some that type, uh, it's not really necessary. They're already made for garden beds. Now, this is from the old garden. This raised bed was probably about 12 inches, maybe 14 inches high. It was the Allen Block Junior, and I had rhubarb in it, and it was right up against the greenhouse. I was able to put really good compost soil in it and sand, and my rhubarb always did wonderfully in there. I did have some raised garden beds that I did vegetables, but I couldn't find any photos of them. So I showed this as a raised garden bed. It had my rhodos in it. Underneath of it was my septic tank, and it had elevators above it so that the cleanouts were readily available. Poured concrete. Great long durability. They last forever. And durability and longevity. Cons, really heavy weight. You really have to make sure that they're properly formed. Potential to affect soil pH. With lime, it would have a tendency to raise the pH, and most vegetables like a pH of 6 to 7. Nothing too much higher, nothing too much lower. So you really would have to probably do some adjustment of the pH. Very difficulty of modifying the bed. In other words, you can't add height to it, you can't increase the size of it without going through quite a bit of construction. Moving the bed, impossible, unless you get a sky hook to move it for you. Careful planning to get the size and placement right. That's very important. and requiring forms and precise measurements. So this is not something that most gardeners would have the ability to do. Now, these are some of the raised beds. These were from some friends, Alan and his wife, Michelle Bose. And the wood on it is just there for decoration, but they are full concrete beds. They're probably about 2.5 feet wide by about 10 feet long. And she uses it for tomatoes and other things. She has lined them so that she wouldn't have a problem with the pH being altered by the concrete. Felt bags. Breathable, allow good drainage, and you can move them around. Cons may need to be replaced every few growing seasons, can be prone to mold and mildew, and they dry out really quickly. And will need more water, need water more frequently, watered more frequently. Uh, I like them for certain things. Last year, I will show you. I had my glads in a felt bag, and the reason for this is I was not in my new house, and I had these bulbs, and I didn't want to lose them, so I planted them in the felt bag. And this is, whoops, sorry. This is one of my palm trees that I've actually moved with me. It's Camarops humilis cerifera. So it's a blue Moroccan palm, which is hardy here. And I didn't want to leave it in my old garden. So I dug it up and carried it to the rental and then brought it here. And you can see along the bottom, you've got some moss growing on it and stuff like that. The Whoops, sorry. Well, I guess that's it for that. Heap soil improves the drainage, better root development, and does prevent waterlogging. Cons can dry out quite a bit faster. May not provide enough stability for taller plants, like if you're planting corn or something like this, or anything that requires a pole to hold it steady. Sometimes lead to uneven planting. Surfaces are not carefully managed. So in other words, it's not easy to actually rake them or get them all even. Also, watering them can be a bit of a problem because the water, if it's like a cone shape, the water will drain off the sides and everything else. So you'd almost have to have it flat top, so it's sloped on the edges and then with a flat top on it. And this is what a raised hugelkultur bed would look like, basically. So under this is the wood and organic material, and they pile the soil on top of it. Dry stacked rocks. Natural aesthetics, excellent drainage, and durability. And the cons, potential instability. In other words, unless these rocks are flat or like slate, they won't be prone to sitting too steadily in there. Difficult in construction, especially if you've got all these rocks that are different sizes and different shapes and everything else. My partner Dwayne loved working with these because it took him forever to make a raised bed out of them. He'd be there choosing a rock, just the right rock. Oh, damn, it doesn't fit. So you'd have to go back to the rock pile and choose another rock. Thickness of the rock wall. If you've got not a lot of space, well, then rock wall may not be a good idea for you unless you have a large area. Careful planning and selection of the appropriately sized rocks. Definitely. but they look great. And it looks really kind of natural and everything else. Again, this is slate, so it's easier to work with. But a wall like this would cost mucho dinero, especially here on the island. If you've got a lot of slate available to you, then that would be the way to go. How do you fill these raised beds? Healthy soil will help you produce healthy plants in your raised beds. Duh. Soil supplies plants with soil organisms, water, air, nutrients. Ideal garden soil is loose, deep, crumbly, holds water for root uptake, and allows excess rainfall to percolate downward quickly. And organic matter. They suggest that 25 to 50% organic volume, organic material to volume, or 5 to 15 by weight. So you can do this by adding compost. You can do it by adding all kinds of material to it. And this is another raised bed. It's a metal wood combination. These are some friends who actually built these beds just a while back. And you can see they're doing kind of a hugelkultur as best as they can, basically. And it actually works quite well because you can imagine the cost of filling this bed with just soil in it. And again, you have the wood that will rot, hold the moisture. You'll have good bugs in it and everything else. Okay, filling your raised garden beds. Okay, native soil. It's readily available if it's usable, that is. If it's clay, well, maybe not so much. Can be cost effective, yeah. Especially now when you're paying probably $1,000 for 18 cubic yards. And environmentally friendly, right? You're not using something that's been processed, it's on your lot and you can use it. You can amend the soil yourself. Cons may require soil amendments, especially if you've got clay. Or if it's a gravel, you'd have to try to take out the rocks and everything else. Potentially lacking necessary elements, especially here on the island. We have very acid soil, so everything kind of leaches out of the soil. May not drain well, right? Especially if it's got a lot of clay in it. Introduction of weed seeds and roots. And I don't know if you've ever built a raised bed with actually native soil. The last lot I had that scourge, the horsetail. It was the bane of my existence. It was horrible stuff. And I used the native soil in my beds. I sifted the sand, got all the rocks out, tried to get all the roots out. But lo and behold, there happened to be a few roots. And I kept it under control, but still, every year they'd be at least a few poking up through the soil. And then you'd have to go digging, try to find the root and everything else. So, yeah. Introduction of pests and diseases. Pests, wireworms, any fungus or anything like that that you don't want in your raised beds. Or actually, even you could be taking in eggs of slugs and snails in with it. And compaction issues. Compaction issues have to do with a soil that's been has quite a bit of clay and gets compacted over the wintertime with our rains. And it can be problematic, especially for some of the more fibrous rooted veggies. Filling your soil. Purchase soil mixes. Pros. Can have the correct mix of mineral and organic content. Free of weeds and pests. Now, I say this with just make sure whoever you're getting the soil from has a guarantee that there's no weed seeds in them, and hold them to it, please. Because there's nothing worse than bringing in a whole load of soil and then finding out that you've got weeds from here to eternity. And guess what? The weeds are spread throughout the whole soil. So every time you plant something, you're bringing more weed seeds up to the soil surface. Requires minimum amending. Hopefully, and it's free draining. So in other words, it's got a sandy, a good mix, a good loam. Expensive, yep. High carbon footprint. Now, what do I mean by that? Is there had to be a whole bunch of machinery to do this soil. So in other words, they have to go out and get the soil in, they have to amend it and everything else. Some of them it's sifted through sifters so to get any of the rocks out and stuff like that. So by high carbon footprint, that's what I mean. May lack fertility, NPK, nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, whatever. The three. And may need soil inoculants. Now, what I'm talking about soil inoculants is if you have a bed that is separated from the native soil to the bed itself, well, then you don't have any of the good bacteria or the good bugs and everything else in the soil. So you may end up having to add some compost or something to bring in these good bacterias and bugs. Okay, culture, just kind of showing you how they build it, the decaying logs at the logs and then decaying logs and then the twigs and branches, compost, leave, and then soil on the top. It's a great way of growing vegetables and stuff like that. But again, tall vegetables like corn or anything that has any height may not actually grow too well in something like that. Requires space, not suitable for small urban gardens. Now, if you live on an acreage or something, or you have a lot of room, well, then, you can have quite a few of these all in a line and it works quite well. But in a small urban lot, then it would be more difficult.
And if
Provide,
I could interject too, when I read on the history of hugelkultur, one of the primary reasons it was used was that where it started was in forested areas. And there was a problem getting rid of all this stuff. And so piles were made and it was planted on top. And I've seen people deciding to go to hugelkultur and they use all the wrong combinations and things don't compost well and they wonder what's going on. And the only thing I can say to them is, you pulled all this stuff in. Why didn't you just make a raised bed? So if you have this stuff on site and you're having trouble getting rid of it, you could plant on top. But as you say, Richard, it's usually in a big space that it's used.
yeah, and also fir or pine or cedar is not great for hugelkultur. Alder or big leaf maple, anything that rots down quite readily would work much better. Pile decomposes over the years, you're building up premium garden soil. Gives a home to garden waste, and gardeners report that the mounds make it easier to garden, to work in. Now, yeah, but again, if it's a 4 foot pile, great, you can reach over. But if it's like a big mound, well, then it'd be quite a bit different and more difficult. Okay. The other thing is it can provide overwintering spots for rodents, especially if there's not a good cover of soil on top of it. The rodents can get in and they've got a lovely warm place to spend the winter. And that's rats, mice, you name it. Planting your raised beds. Plant the tall growing plants or vines at the north side of the bed. So not to shade your smaller vegetables. Smaller plants in the south side of the bed. Makes sense. Practice crop rotation. Do not plant the same crop in the same location year after year. Now, why would that be? Well, we have allium rust. We have all kinds of pathogens that actually overwinter in the soil. And if you're planting the same crop, same place every year, well, then you have more of a chance of actually getting these on your vegetables. And it's not only allium rust, there's many other pathogens, and actually even soil pests like clubroot on brassicas or anything like this. So it's always a good idea to move your vegetables from one bed to another, and try not to plant them in the same bed. Probably rotate maybe 3, 4 times and then come back to the original. Companion planting, flowers and vegetables in the same bed. Yeah, you can do that, and it's actually quite pretty. You can have nasturtiums in a bed, which actually add not only something for the aphids to suck on, other than your veggies or your brassicas, but you also have lovely edible flowers. They're so tasty. They're like little pepper, a burst of pepper in your mouth. There are other flowers that are quite tasty too. Succession planting. Now, what I mean by succession planting, here on the island, we can plant probably 3 crops a year. We can plant one in the spring, and then probably about 2 or 3 weeks later, we can plant the same crop again. And that way we spread out our harvest over the season. We're not all of a sudden having 40 pounds of beans that my partner Dwayne doesn't like doing all at once. So I end up cutting them up for him and trying to freeze or anything like that. So you can actually spread the harvest season throughout the year. You can plant spring vegetables. You can plant fall vegetables like brassicas and everything else. You can plant tomatoes in the bed during the summer, during the warm summer months. So you can do quite a bit of successional planting here. Use the square foot gardening guide to maximum crop yield. Now, I know we used to be in this thing where we'd plant rows and rows and rows of the same type of vegetable. And it may look pretty and may look sort of, oh, it looks so tidy. But gardening isn't tidy. It's like a dirty job. And you want some pizzazz to your garden. You don't want like a whole bunch of, well, corn you would plant in a group, but like your vegetables don't have to be planted all over the place, all in one big clump. And Square Foot Gardening Guide gives you some really good ideas. They also have there's a couple of books out. There's also a it's like a form that you put on the ground and you can poke holes through it and show you where to plant your seeds and everything else. Grow vegetables that are proven reliable in your garden zone. So, in other words, look at vegetables and look time to maturity on the seeds. And that is really important because if you live in a zone or a climate zone where your heat is only for a month during the summer and it's cool before that and cool after that, well, chances are you're not going to really get good tomatoes or some of your other vegetables that require high heat. So again, look at the how long it takes to mature and talk to your fellow gardeners. We're always more than happy to give you information on what type of vegetables work for us, what is something that will work quite well in our zone. Watch for garden pests, those little buggers. Go out at night. And I know Jo used to do this with her headlight on her head, foraging for those snails and those
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It made my
slugs.
neighbors crazy too, which was really fun. What is she doing out there?
There's that crazy lady.
Yeah, yeah, that crazy garden lady. Yeah.
Watch for garden diseases also, please. I had mentioned allium rust. Well, if you see it on your vegetables, yeah, it doesn't, the bulbs are still good, but they're not anywhere near as large. And if you have it in one bed, don't plant it again in that same bed, and don't reuse your bulbs. Actually, go out and buy new bulbs because you won't be introducing anything that way. Garden bed accessories, trellises for growing vines, beans, peas, etc. Or actually, even if you wanted to put some flowering peas or sweet peas in the garden, lovely flowers, lovely fragrance to them. And yeah, tomato cages. We all know what a tomato cage is. Garden stakes, garden plant tags. Now there's a good idea. What did I plant there? Looks like a bean. Is it? I don't know. Yeah, use garden tags. Hoop for row covers, plastic or metal. Uh, Extend the season, keep out pests. Remay floating row cover for insects and pests. Garden netting for birds, for berry fruit. Nothing worse than actually having some blueberries and going out there because you were out there the day before and they were just at that point in time where they'd be just delicious. They're gone. What happened? The robins got them. Drip irrigation. Why drip? Because you don't want to be spraying your plants with water, especially not at night. If you're going to be planting, spraying, spray in the morning and allow things to dry out. But spraying the leaves is not really going to help much, other than if you've got maybe aphids on them. But then you can always invite some ladybugs into your yard. Drip irrigation is definitely the way to go, especially on the island here where you have lack of rainfall in the summertime and you really don't want to be wasting water. Cloches. What is a cloche? A cloche can be made out of glass, sits on the plant, keeps it warm during the cool spring day evenings, and actually works like a little mini greenhouse. Square foot gardening guide. Oops. Let's go back. Yearly maintenance. Nope. I think I went the wrong way. Okay, logbook or journal. Why? Well, because that way you can keep track of what vegetables you planted, which ones worked out for you, which ones didn't work out for you. Let's say if you planted your carrots and they ended up with worms in them, well, then perhaps you might have planted them too late or not early enough. So that's one thing. Also, when you planted things, what the weather was like, anything like this is a really good idea to keep in your log, in your journal. Now, this is, yeah, this is Michael Fox's garden again. Michael Fox and what's your name again? Peter? And Peter. You can see that they've got the wire holding it up, and in there they have brassicas. Right. So this would have been last fall.
No, it's right now.
Oh, right now they
But
got them.
they were planted last fall and they overwintered in there.
Ah, okay. You overwintered them in there. Yearly maintenance. Yeah, there is maintenance on those garden beds. Adding organic material, fall leaves, grass clippings, and compost. Yeah, what a wonderful idea. You're actually adding micronutrients back to the soil. You're adding organic matter. You're adding, with grass, you're actually adding quite a bit of nitrogen also. Lime to sweeten the soil, raise the pH. Now, if your soil is anything like the soil here on the island, it's quite acid. And it's probably more acid than is really necessary for your vegetables. Again, like I said, 6 to 7 pH is ideal. Anything below that, you end up having plants difficulty bringing up iron. Any higher than that, then you have the opposite problem. So sweeten the soil with lime. Now, on the island, yes, it's probably quite acid. But elsewhere in the province, probably not. In the Okanagan, I don't think it would be. Fertilizer, NPK, organic, slow release, and chemical. Micronutrients and macronutrients. Now, these are important to the soil and your plant health. I won't go through the whole list of them. They are available on this website, the government BCCA integrated pest management. What do I mean by integrated pest management? It's actually making sure that you watch, you listen, and you react. When you see something happening in your garden, you make sure that you react immediately. In other words, if you've got some disease like clubroot on your brassicas, yank them out, put them, send them to the landfill or wherever. Don't keep them in the yard. And same thing with bugs, aphids. If you've got, if you can overwinter some of the beneficial bugs in your yard, all the better for you. And by overwintering, I mean like adding a pile of lumber somewhere or maybe a pile of rocks. Snakes, garter snakes love slugs. They just love slugs. And if you want to get rid of slugs in your yard, invite garter snakes into your yard. Now, I know that most people don't like snakes in the yard, but anyway, they work. And they're harmless. They don't bite. At least I haven't heard of one biting yet. Okay, and that's it. These are the references: Backyard Bounty, Linda Gilkinson, all new square foot gardening by Mel Bartholomew, Canadian Edible Garden by Alison Beck, and West Coast Seeds. Raised beds, the benefits is ngb.org, and then Better Homes and Gardens. And that's it.
Some things about garter snakes. There's a ton of questions.
Great.
Some
Thank you,
interesting questions.
Richard. Yeah. Joe, do you want to funnel the questions to Richard?
Yeah, good idea.
Actually, why don't we all do it as a panel?
Oh, okay, sure.
Okay, who's going to ask them?
Well, let me see. What have we got here? Soil types for containers. In particular, the bag soils. It sounds like you kind of already dealt with that one. I think the main difference is understanding the difference between a container and a raised bed.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. A container would be smaller, basically. A raised bed would be larger. A container, you'd be more worried about drying out faster. You'd be more worried about leaching any of the NPK out of it or any of the micronutrients and stuff like that. In a raised bed, fertilizing maybe with long-lasting organic fertilizer or something is probably great, or actually compost. But in a container, it's slightly different. You'd end up having to use probably a slow release gel sort of fertilizer.
I found that growing both with raised beds and containers, that the rule of thumb was the smaller the container, the more extreme and the more management you needed to do,
Yeah.
whether it's
And they warm up.
amendments or, yeah, they get too
Heat
warm,
up.
too cold, too hot, too wet, too dry. And the larger raised bed, and as you were saying, an optimum size of 4 wide and 8 long. And that fits in if you're making wooden beds, it's great because it's a perfect thing.
4x8.
And it also creates a square meter of soil. So if you're adding anything to it, it's all your bags are the square meter is your thing. Is that I treated them as if they were in ground because they were in ground. They were just easier to manage because they were in smaller chunks.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to make a comment about raised beds. I actually have big metal galvanized stock tanks for my raised bed, which look similar to what you're building, Richard. And I like them because they're higher. I don't have to get down on the ground. But what I discovered was that unless you're putting actual absolute native soil in them, if you're putting things in that are going to decompose, the soil level sinks. Every year, the soil level sinks, and you have to keep topping it up and adding more stuff. So just be aware of that when you have a lot of organic matter in
What I
whatever.
do is I would actually add compost every year to the top of it and sort of actually work it into maybe the top couple inches.
Right,
Well
exactly.
compost,
I just I don't
composted.
have enough compost to top all of mine up. So I've actually gone out and purchased more topsoil kind of stuff and added to them because yeah.
Right,
And I followed the instructions with laying chunks of wood or branches and things in the bottom and
right.
coarser stuff. And so that's even more stuff to decompose and sink.
Yeah,
So
true enough.
just be aware that that's going to happen.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Deborah, because beyond 2 feet of soil, your vegetables aren't going to use it. If you're going to be planting trees, that's another
Right,
issue. But
right,
for almost all our garden plants, um, 2 feet is the active area.
right.
right. Yeah.
Someone is talking about watering frequency in raised beds, and someone else was also specifically asking about brassicas in winter. And um,
So watering your raised beds, what you'd end up having to actually just stick your finger in it. And if you see it's dry for the first couple of inches, then maybe water and not a heavy water, just to keep that topsoil damp, basically, because you're just adding water and basically it percolates down. So even if you just add to the top few inches, it'll work its way down into the soil itself. The other thing is you don't want to leave it too long between waterings because your soil surface will become hydrophobic. So the water won't go into the soil. It'll just kind of run off to the sides. So again, but if you've got a lot of organic material in it and stuff like that, it's fine. But
in
maybe
addition,
once or twice a week.
yeah, I found that people have come to me about problems with their vegetables, and it is so often a watering problem. And the two primary ones are you're watering too much,
Much, or you're
and
not
everything
watering
is
enough.
just, you're just like accelerating all the nutrients out of the soil before the plant can use them. And also watering not infrequently, but watering irregularly.
Yeah,
Um,
especially
so
with
many
tomatoes.
vegetables get off tastes, like cucumbers. Oh, my cucumbers are bitter. My lettuce is bitter. Look at your watering regimen, and
Well, the other thing
and
is
don't drown the poor
look at
thing.
tomatoes. If you let them
Yes,
dry out, you get that blossom end rot because they can't uptake the calcium from the soil. So yeah, if you're really fearful about overwatering, you're not watering enough, just get yourself one of those soil moisture things and put it down to about maybe 6 or 8 inches and see what the soil is like down there. Now, the caveat is though, when you're starting your seed, you might need to water a little bit more so that the actual roots go down deeper into the soil.
and oh, you're so right, Richard, because there's it's that old adage, particularly with lawns.
Yeah.
You know, lots of water makes shallow soil, makes poor plants.
Hmm.
And even vegetables that we have bred to be very fast growing, they still need as deep roots as they can get. And there was another question about water, Richard, about watering the brassicas in winter that are covered. Now,
I
if
don't think you really need to.
yeah, Krisha, um, I'm not sure if you mean if that's in a greenhouse or if it's just in a hoop house uh, in a raised bed,
Well,
because
in a
you don't
greenhouse,
water them in winter.
no, you wouldn't, unless you've got a heated greenhouse or something that, the plants will grow and transpire to a certain degree. Well, then, no, it's probably not a good idea because you're just going to, if it's cold and moist, you're just going to ask for problems with fungus and mold and stuff like that. So keep them, if you got them in the greenhouse, keep them on the dry side, not overly wet. But if you got them in the hoop house, shouldn't be a problem at all.
Now, Marion asks an interesting question, Richard. Can I add lime in my bed that is overwintered plants still growing in
Nope, not a good idea.
it?
No, I would add it probably in the fall, and not a lot of it. Just sprinkle it over the surface, and dolomite lime is good because it has not only lime, but it's got calcium to it. So it adds the calcium too. But not a good idea because you may end up burning the roots with the lime. So you want to make sure that you give that lime time to get through the soil.
Here's one. If you get too much sun in summer, drying out your raised beds, what's the best shade cloth to use?
Remay.
That's what I use.
Is a good product, especially if it's in a fairly hot, sunny place. But remember, your raised beds only need 6 hours of direct sunlight a day. So that could be in the morning with a break at noon and then later in the afternoon, or it could be all in late afternoon. It doesn't have to be during the heat of the day.
And do you need to rotate perennials in raised beds?
Not really, not that I know. Perennial vegetables you might have to, like, I really don't know much about perennial vegetables other than Dorothy did a wonderful presentation on perennial vegetables last month. So do look it up. It would be on the VIRL website, and it has been posted on YouTube.
And I did an older one a few years ago as well on another group of perennials. And the answer is no. A perennial is a perennial is a perennial.
Yeah.
Whether you eat off it or you don't eat off it, a perennial is a perennial.
Well,
Now,
like asparagus, no, you wouldn't want to move that around.
you don't move them.
Rhubarb,
Yeah, you don't move it.
No, you don't move it. The more in situ they are, the better they are. The more they're growing and everything else.
That's
And the
right.
more
And
pest resistant they would be. Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry, dear.
I think the person is worried about pests. You're talking about crop rotation
No.
regarding pests.
No. Perennial vegetables have been around for years, and a lot of them are quite hardy and pest resistant.
And as I say, they are perennials. Most edible perennials, like berries, need more amendment, like compost, because we demand more from the plant, and the plant is putting everything into production for us to eat. All you have to do is look at the wild variety of a plant, and you'll immediately see it produces less food for us.
Less food.
And that's why we domesticated them.
Yeah, exactly.
So the more you take out, the more you put back. But moving them, you don't have to. You shouldn't.
No.
Let me see. I'd like to grow flowers for cutting in raised beds.
Wonderful idea.
Suggest easy to grow flowers for cutting.
You could dahlias, zinnias,
Ostromeria.
You could also grow straw flowers, anything like that, or you could actually even do nasturtiums, which will come back year after year if you let them go to seed.
And lots of the spring bulbs make great cut flowers as well.
Yeah, they do. Gladiolas. Yeah.
Miniature sunflowers.
And you can mix them in with your vegetables, right? You can have a splash of color with your brassicas.
Now there's one here that's interesting from Barbara. She says, I have mold in one of my raised beds. Should I remove it before planting or mix it in with compost? Anything else I should do to prevent mold growing? Gosh, Barbara, what do you mean by mold? If you've got soil with all these white streaky things through it,
that's good.
That's a good thing. That's not bad mold. That's what we call the soil web. And all healthy soil has that. Now, if you mean green, moldy slime stuff on top, type us something, Barbara, and we can take that other one.
There's a lot of natural molds and mycorrhizae that actually grow in the soil. And when I was mentioning about soil inoculants, that's basically what I was saying is sterile soil has nothing in there, so your vegetables may not grow as well as they would if it had these mycorrhizae in the soil. and earthworms.
So here we have some
Barbara
three.
did do a follow-up, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Mycelium, I have green spore-like mold, the same mold that grows on trees, etc.
Oh, that's not mold,
That's moss.
moss.
Yay!
Yes, that's moss, and we are the moss capital of the world, and people come from all over the world to study our mosses. And if you have a bit of moss in your soil, just dig it in.
Yeah.
However, if you're getting a lot of moss, you may be putting too much water.
Too much water, or the soil is being kept too damp, or it isn't draining as well, or it actually needs some
Too
lime.
shady. Yeah. Now it says here, oh, this is one of my favorites. You can tell us about this one, Richard. I've read you should put hardware cloth at the bottom before filling raised beds to keep critters from digging into them from the bottom.
I don't really think there's that many critters that would go into the bed, especially if they've got solid sides. The only reason in my last garden, I did have felt at the bottom of them. And the reason for that is I was gardening with horsetail, and I wanted to keep it out of the beds. So I put down, it was like a heavy duty felt from the pulp and paper mills down first. And then I put my soil on top of that. But
yeah. So essentially you were creating a real giant container just to keep out
exactly. And
right.
unfortunately, okay. I had no other option. Either that or I would have been picking it out all the time. So I did that. It was good, but I did inoculate the soil. I did have some soil that I made sure didn't have any root seeds or anything else in it. I actually put it in I added it to the soil in the thing. And then I would top dress with compost every year, which would add more good beneficial insects.
And I found I've had raised beds of all different kinds in all different places. Never have I ever had a pest crawl in from the bottom. Yeah. I've planted it too close to cedar trees, which was my fault. And the roots will come in from the bottom. And like you, Richard, I've planted in areas where there was horsetail, and horsetail and cockroaches will be here when we're extinct. How about you, Deborah?
I'm sorry. I was busy typing answers to the questions, and
questions.
Yeah, I've been typing answers to some of the questions. What was your question, Joe? About
just did you ever line the bottom of your beds with landscape cloth?
I did not. I just put them right on the bare ground. Now, on the other hand, all of the soil in my yard was a lot of it was subsoil because our house was built new and the contractor had scraped everything off. So where I put my stock tanks was on places I had not brought topsoil in. We actually put gravel down, crushed gravel, and then the tanks right over that. So
over that, yeah.
And they, now that I think about it though, they have a bottom.
Yes, they do.
Tanks have a bottom. They have a drain.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually had raised beds with wooden sides about 12 inches high at my previous house. And I didn't have anything in the bottom of those, and I didn't have critters. It just wasn't an issue.
Yes.
You would have is if you're building a mound or something like that, and you don't have soil right down to the ground level all the way around it, that the critters get in and, but there's no barrier there.
You might have moles coming up from underneath. I mean, that's possible. If you have moles around where you are, they could come up underneath, but I never did. So
yeah. Nor I. What else have we got here? Are grow bags better than big buckets for potatoes?
Yeah,
definitely. They probably drain better.
They drain better. You get more air into it.
Right.
They hold the heat in, and you can actually add more soil to it and build the soil level up. Because like tomatoes, you can bury them deeper, and then you get these adventitious roots growing along the stem, right?
Someone asked how you build beds above your septic system.
How?
Are you talking
Yeah,
about the drainage area of your septic, the drain field?
No.
yeah, the drain
This,
field. As
no,
far as
no,
I know, that's a
Don't,
no-no.
don't,
no,
don't,
no,
well, not food crops.
no, not
You
food
can, you
crops.
can, you can do
The beds that
ornamental.
I had were actually on top of the actual septic box, the big box.
Oh, oh,
It
right,
wasn't on the field at all. And the only
right.
reason I did that is because it was sticking out in the middle of the lawn, these things sticking up. And I thought, well, I got to do
Cover
something
them.
with this. So, I'm going to cover them with a bed, a raised bed, and just plant some rhodos because I knew rhodos weren't deep rooted. So there wouldn't be any problem with them getting into the septic tanks.
And in my younger life, when there were still wolves in Wales, we used to build houses, and the primary no-no was compaction on top of your septic field. So
No.
you didn't drive trucks over it. You could walk over it and stuff like that. That wasn't a problem because over the years the septic system will collapse. It's just nature. It will collapse. And so you don't put a lot of weight on it and you don't grow food crops over it. It grows food crops great, but human waste is not conducive to good health as a food source for plants. So you don't. Um, and if you want to put a raised bed over your septic tank, just be sure you can get to the septic tank. Um,
You can get these collars that actually lift it up.
yeah,
So you don't have to actually dig down. Nothing
yeah.
worse than planting something and then having to dig up the soil to get to this septic tank.
Two related things. I use the term hoop house. That's just row cover on hoops. That's it.
Yeah.
And sometimes people make them on a frame, and so it becomes a house.
Right.
But that was that. But related to that, Rachel asks advice on preventing carrot rust fly.
Planting at the right time of the year.
I would recommend that you go to Linda Gilkison's website and look it up.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Linda Gilkison, Gilkeson. Just look her up and she's amazing. She's an entomologist. She has all kinds of information on pests and she will give you chapter and verse on what to do for carrot rust fly, how to prevent it.
Yeah, she says if you plant them before or if you harvest them before the first generation comes out of the ground, then you're good. And then you plant just after that generation gets comes out, and then you harvest. You can do
But
two harvests a year.
she will tell you when those generations are
Yeah,
happening.
yeah,
Yeah,
she does.
yeah, she does.
And
There's a couple of
And if
questions.
you can't do that, I always covered mine with remay on the
Remake.
ground. I just excluded the pest.
Yeah.
But you have to get it down before that pest comes out.
And that's it. Yeah, exactly. And that's
And
why
that's where Dr.
yes,
Gilkison has
she'll
got your
tell
time.
you when those carrot rust flies are flying around laying their eggs. There's two questions in here that are kind of related. Best way to get rid of horsetail for good. Any tips for the trifecta of bindweed, buttercup, and Himalayan blackberry control?
Learn to live with it.
Well, no, for all of those, you're in it for the long haul, first of all. Well, not buttercup so much. Buttercup grows where your grass or your soil stays soggy and wet. If you have good drainage, buttercup won't thrive. Himalayan blackberry, bindweed, horsetail, they're terrible. They're awful. If you cut the roots just below soil level, don't pull because that stimulates them to grow. Cut, cut, cut. And it could take years, several years. But if you keep cutting them off, you'll starve them out.
Just,
Actually,
just a little
Deborah,
note.
I cut my bindweed. I just mowed it, and I didn't even have to dig down. And that it I just again deprived it of sunlight, and it died out.
Yeah.
My last garden was called Horsetail Acres. It was horrible. And I cut it and keep cutting it and keep cutting it. It was like,
That's why
at
you
least
moved,
2 or
isn't it?
3 hours a week cutting this stuff.
I
And it
think that's
still
why you
came back.
moved.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I moved.
Yeah.
And as for
And I made
Himalayan,
sure the new yard has no horsetail
has
anywhere
no horsetail,
near.
right? As for the Himalayan, yes, it's one of our invasive species, and you get rid of it by going to the big knot in the ground. When you get that big knot, you've got a something that's really you're gonna be able to get rid of.
The other issue
Understand too is that it will,
is
once it puts out its new runner, or its new a
Canes,
cane,
canes,
that it will root on the end of the canes.
wherever it
Like
touches the
any
ground.
cane
Yeah.
fruit, it grows the first year, fruits the second year. So if you start getting those new canes, that plant's not going to come back. And when it
actually you
doesn't
get
come
them
back,
as you
you'll
just
see the
eat
old
them.
plant, you dig out that knot.
If you see it growing, take it out at that point. Either that or you'll end up being scratched and all bleeding all over the place. So I
Or,
used to go and just pull out the little baby ones.
or if it isn't in a place where it's practical to dig it out, if it's going to disturb everything too much, just keep cutting it. You'll starve it out eventually. Just
You'll
cutting
starve it
it.
out.
Yeah, you'll starve it out because the resources in the roots keep making new plants, and pretty soon those resources are gone and it'll die.
Now, this is interesting. It goes back to the septic field, because Sandra says a weeping field, and I think she means
The drain, drain,
a,
the drain field.
Yeah,
the
you
drain
don't plant
field.
on it.
Yeah, you don't.
Grass, and
And
that's
she
about it.
says, how close do you plant? Now, that's an interesting question.
Well, if it's a garden bed, you could be probably 10 feet away from it and not be problematic. But if you're planting trees, shrubs, or anything like that, no, nowhere near. 20 feet is probably about sufficient.
Well,
Yeah,
if you're worried about your vegetables, what you need to think about the physics. The water comes down the drain field, and the water it's going to spread in the drain field itself, but then it's going to go down. It's
Mm.
not going to
Yeah,
do sideways very much. So if you can kind of determine where, how far, how wide it's going, find out where your drain field is.
actually, if you look in the summertime, you can always tell where it
Yeah,
is
that's right.
because
Yeah.
it's nice and green.
and
Just
and you'll often, and very few drain fields are absolutely flat. There is usually a slight tilt, and as Richard says, look where the green spot is. That's if there's any water coming out of the field, that's where it goes. Plant on the other side. Plant uphill, right? And someone also asked about doing raised beds on sloping ground, and basically
do that.
you terrace it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And basically my old garden, I had it was all terraced in the back. And I brought in blast rock and terraced it all so I could at least plant beds. And they weren't vegetable beds or anything else, but I was able to plant it up so that it actually didn't look like this immense hill in the backyard.
Right. And I had in one garden I had, it was a slightly sloping area, and I had wide terraces, and I actually had a rubble wall and a tiny little space to walk and to
Yeah.
move my things. And then I had 3 feet in front of it. And so I had I had maybe five of them. They were technically raised beds and terraces,
Yeah.
and I positioned it so the winter sun hit those rocks, and I had the best early lettuces, right? Because I had that heat sink there. So
And
look at your ground. understand how much of a slope you've got. And as Richard said, either create proper terraces or just terrace it slightly the way I did. But understand your ground, understand the drainage, understand which way it's going, and make it work for you.
It's about having a lot plan. Look at your lot. Look where the bed will get at least 6 hours of sunlight. And is it wet? Well, then put a raised bed in it. Is it too dry? Well, then you're going to have to irrigate it a little bit more so. But look at that. Look at your microclimates. Look all these things, and then decide where you're going to put these raised beds.
Richard, would you mind if I answer Barb's question about compost?
No, go for it.
Barb, the question is, what do I use for compost in the spring since I can't find leaves around? Well, Barb, your compost is begun the year before, and the library has a seminar on compost, the types of compost, how to use it, how to find materials for it. Go to that recording. It will really tell you pretty much everything you need to know. And there's also some good reference materials on that. Anything to add, Deborah, about that?
No, not about
Okay.
that. No.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that I did put in the chat, and I don't know if everybody saw it. Dr. Linda Chalker Scott, who is one of the garden professors, who is a PhD horticulturist and plant scientist, has an info fact sheet on hugelkultur that is really worth a read. And I was fussing around trying to find a way to post a link, and I couldn't figure out how to post a link to it. But if anybody is interested in getting how to get to that or a copy of it, let Darby know, and Darby can send me your email address, and I'll email you a copy of that document. Okay? It's well worth reading. All interested in hugelkultur.
Thanks, Deborah. Okay, Richard, someone has asked a really direct question about moss in the garden.
Okay.
You kind of answered it, but maybe you could elaborate a little bit. Till it or remove it?
Remove it is not going to work. It's just going to come back. So basically, you're just going to be removing the top layer of soil with the moss. Live with it. Compost
Make
it.
peace with it. Make peace with it.
Yeah, exactly. And guess what? Your lawn will be green all year round.
I go out and I gather bits of moss because I have rocks in my front yard, and I gathered them last year, and now I have exquisite moss covered rocks. It takes several months for them to get their little feet into it.
You could use lime on it, or to sweeten the soil a little bit, because they are an acid loving plant. Or you could learn to live with it, or you can add iron chelate to it, which will actually kill it, but it'll come back next year. It's endemic in the ecosystem. There's no way of really getting rid of it.
And remember, there's no way to permanently change the pH of your soil. You lime your soil, like this spring, and you're going to have to lime it again and again and again and again, because there's no way to permanently change it. So make
You
peace.
live with it.
All you can do.
Yeah.
Or just put in raised beds with a different type of soil. Right?
There we go. Richard had the solution.
Talking about the lawn, you're just as Richard said, you're not going to get rid of it. If you're talking about vegetable beds, you put in a different type of soil, you raise your vegetables, you won't have moss. I had moss all over my place, never had it in my raised bed because the soil wasn't conducive and it was always being worked.
Yeah.
And it drained better too because it's raised.
That's true.
Yeah. On those raised concrete beds that I had, they look wonderful. There was moss growing on them. It was not in the soil, but there was moss all over them.
They're very pretty.
Yeah.
And in February when it blooms, it glows. It's just Oh, yeah. Oh, no, wait a minute. That was maybe that other stuff I was doing.
We have a question about watering raised beds at a community garden. Is there anything you can put in the bed to self-water? No irrigation available, i.e. water globe on a bigger scale for hot days.
Oh, I see what you're
Mm,
saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, the difficulty with that is not having any water available to you. So the only way you could really do it is bring in containerized water, like in big jugs or something. Use drip irrigation, or actually, if you've got a roof anywhere, collect the rainwater. You know, that's the only other real way around it, other than bringing
And
in a big water tank.
self-watering is I think the core of the question.
Self-watering?
oh,
Yeah.
self-watering. Yes, that's always an option. I've never, I mean, I use self-watering containers for many, many years, but that's container gardening.
That's
That's
not in
not
a raised bed.
that's not a raised bed. If
No.
I was in your situation, I would get myself a big rain barrel and I would put it up on its stand so I have a very slow slope, and then I would fill it and let the rain fill it, and then I would have my lines going out there and give it a drip once a week.
The only other
And
thing
that
is
50 gallons going to go a long way.
the more organic material you have in the soil, the longer the water will last in it. Also, insulating around the edge of the bed so the soil doesn't warm up as quickly. Adding mulch to the soil surface, anything like that would work. But
And
regardless,
even in the height of summer, adding a very light shade cloth.
yeah,
Um,
good
and if
key.
you don't want to spend money on shade cloths, go down to the thrift store and get those old sheer curtains. They have about a 20% um, shade effect. And so for holding moisture in, they're great just to have them up above your bed, like on your hoops. And they don't slow the growth, but they do hold a bit of moisture, and they're not as thick as your remain, as your row cover.
One of the uh, participants suggested OLAs for self-watering in raised beds as they've done that
Okay.
before. Maybe in conjunction with the soil and some covering, the person won't have to go every day in the summer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. OLAs will work. That's a very old method for um, for watering. Comes out of the Southwest, out of Central America, um, and it does work very well. OLAs are expensive to buy. They're basically a clay pot within a pot, um, and they, like all clay pots, are great because they hold the water and let it out.
Very
Again,
simply.
a raised bed is different than a container. And OLAs in raised beds do work very well. They're expensive. Is there anything else? Someone's asking where you can buy soil in Victoria. And Jean, I apologize. North of the Malahat here, we don't have a lot of um, ways to find sources for Victoria. If you go to the MGABC website, which is the British Columbia website, and click on Victoria Master Gardeners, ask them through that portal, and they will be able to tell you. Richard, what type of organic fertilizers do you recommend?
There is some fish compost that you can get. There is some granular Gia is a good one.
Uh,
Uh,
the one that I like is Gaia Green. It's organic and
Gaia, sorry,
it's
Gaia
kind of
Green.
a powdery granular. It's very nice. It's not it doesn't have real high values of any of the elements in it, so you're not likely to burn your plants
the
with it.
roots or some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one. And you can buy that if you want a large bag of that rather than the small amounts at nurseries. Go to a feed store and you can get a great big bag of it. You save a lot of money that way.
And I think something that
Dr.
people
Fields carries it. There's various other garden centers that carry it.
But it does come in big bags, so look
Yeah.
around them so you can
yeah,
find
and something that
bag.
people don't appreciate about our region, even though they may have lived here, is this isn't other places. This is a place that has amazing biomass. And the main problem with plants here is that they grow themselves to death because we feed them. If they were our children, they'd weigh 300 pounds and be really sick. And so people say, I got to put this on. I got to put this on. Why? What does the plant tell you?
Right.
And
who wanted a fat cabbage anyway?
Yeah, you know, man. And as Deborah says, those low numbers are really important.
Really much better.
Because we've got compost, we've got good soil, we've got plants that are suited to our region. But because we're demanding so much out of the soil, not out of the plants, out of the soil, we have to keep adding back. And that's everything is accelerated, particularly with vegetables. So you put it into the soil in such a manner that the soil can manipulate it. Soil can't manipulate high values. And
we have our
let the soil do its work.
That actually leach a lot of the nutrients out of the soil.
And the high values, you know, it's like, the pesticides leak into the water. So does really good organic fertilizer when you put too much on.
Yeah.
And I think that people
You can tell by
that.
looking at the plant. If it's weak and spindly, well then, it's not getting the proper nutrients. And if it's growing a lot of leaves, well, then you're providing a little bit too much nitrogen. So your plant will tell you what it needs, basically.
And I think, you know, Deborah, the one thing that I learned to add to my winter garden, where I had a lot of brassicas and plants that started in more highly mineralized soils, was that I always added a seaweed meal, because it has the right amounts of bioavailable trace minerals. And
right.
we're often very low in trace minerals here. And rather than doing a great huge cost of finding out exactly what was wrong, by putting the seaweed meal in, again, low numbers, and the soil took it and changed it, and the plants took what they needed. And I found that and the Gaia Green really worked very well. And the harvest home, it's from the island, and you get it a lot. Rats ain't age great. It's harvest something, but they do a 444. That's they call it flower power. That's absolutely wonderful. And all his stuff is organic, and he's biochemist. And so his mixes for various things like tomatoes and whatnot, I've always found very, very good. And you don't have to buy a lot to have them work.
I think Gaia Green is 444 as well, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Have we got growing anything on the septic mound? No. We kind of went through that one.
Yeah.
And wood used in the bottom of the deep beds. Anything? It all works. It all rots. The only thing I wouldn't use is arbutus.
No, it's a very hard wood.
Yeah, we used to gather when we used a wood stove. When the winds would happen, we would gather the downed branches that broke off, and it burns longer than oak. It's remarkable wood. So that's the only thing I wouldn't use.
Okay. So, Derby,
I
I know
think
we've got a
we've
whole bunch of more
completed.
questions.
I think you got through the questions. Thank you, everybody, for all of your questions. And we have these question periods at the end of each of the sessions. And thank you so much, Richard, for sharing your presentation with everybody, and to Joe and Deborah for chiming in with your expertise, and to all of you for sharing things like where to get soil and Victoria in the chat, and your comments and experiences as well. We will send out the link with the video, as well as a link to the article that Deborah was talking about the Google
Google culture.
culture. Yes, the big
It's
big
it's a
German mound
It's
thing.
a German word.